The small town high school sat nestled between old trees, its red brick walls marking a place where the ordinary seemed to thrive. Nothing ever really changed here, and the students, for the most part, were just like the town, quiet, predictable, and often content to keep to themselves. Most of the teachers knew their students by name, and the same faces passed through the halls year after year, but there was something special about this school, something I couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't the buildings or the lessons. It was the way the stories of each student unfolded, slowly, gently, like a book being read one page at a time. As a guidance counselor, I watched the lives of these kids with a caring eye. They came to me with their struggles, grades, family issues, future plans, and I did my best to listen, offering advice when needed. But I always had a soft spot for those who slipped under the radar. And then, one chilly November morning, a boy named Eli walked into my office. He arrived mid-year, a quiet presence among a sea of loud voices. Eli was thin, with shaggy brown hair that often fell into his eyes, and he kept his head low, as if trying not to be noticed. He was the type of student who faded into the background, never raising his hand in class, always choosing a seat in the back corner where no one would bother him. His clothes were simple, unremarkable, and his backpack seemed far too large for his small frame. The teachers hardly noticed him at all, caught up in their routines and the usual students who caught their attention with loud voices or eager hands raised high. Mr. Carson, the English teacher, often mocked Eli's silence. Lazy, he'd mutter under his breath when Eli's grades dropped again. Unmotivated, he'd say, as if those words defined Eli. The students, too, whispered about him, calling him weird or slow, as if the boy's quiet nature was a flaw rather than just a part of who he was. No one bothered to look deeper. One day, the school assigned a project that involved students creating a piece of art that expressed something personal, a feeling, a memory, a dream. Most students groaned at the idea, unsure of what to draw, while others scribbled something half-heartedly, but not Eli. He handed in his project late, just before the bell rang. It was a drawing, an intricate sketch of a bird, wings spread wide, flying against a stormy sky. The detail was astonishing. Each feather appeared to be caught in motion, the winds visible in the way the lines danced. The bird's eyes were full of pain, yet there was a glimmer of hope in its gaze. It was a masterpiece, and it left me breathless for a moment. Mr. Carson, however, didn't share the same appreciation. He took one glance at the drawing, rolled his eyes, and made a dismissive comment. Probably just traced it, he muttered under his breath, shuffling it to the side with the rest of the students' work. But something about Eli's art stuck with me. It was more than just a drawing. It was a window into something deeper, something raw. Later that day, I happened to notice Eli leaving the art room with a large weathered bag slung over his shoulder. It was heavy, stuffed to the brim with sketchbooks. Curiosity tugged at me. I had to know more. That afternoon, I gently asked him if I could take a look at his work. He hesitated, eyes darting to the ground, before nodding quietly. I followed him to the hallway where, as if reluctant to share, he unzipped the bag and pulled out one of the sketchbooks. Page after page was filled with drawings, raw, emotional, and impossibly detailed. The faces, the landscapes, the objects, they all told stories of sorrow, hope, and longing. It was clear these weren't just sketches, they were pieces of his soul. I glanced up at him, startled. Eli, this is incredible. Why didn't you show anyone before? He shrugged, his voice barely a whisper. Drawing helps with the head noise, he said, almost as if it were a secret he didn't want to share. It's the only way I can make sense of everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Eli's silence, more than just the quiet boy who sat in the back of the classroom. I knew that look he often wore, the one that seemed like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. It was the kind of expression I had seen in other students who had gone through things that couldn't be fixed with a simple conversation or a homework assignment. Curiosity led me to do a little digging, quietly and respectfully, as I tried to piece together his story. What I found broke my heart. 2 years ago, Eli lost both of his parents in a car accident. The news had hit the town hard, and I remembered it vaguely. There had been a candlelight vigil, and the community had come together to support the family. But I hadn't known Eli back then. Now I understood why he kept his distance from everyone. The grief of losing both parents so suddenly, without warning, had shaped him in ways that no one could see on the surface. Since the accident, Eli had been bouncing between foster homes, never quite finding a place to call his own. The system had been kind enough to find him a home with a warm couple, but they were overwhelmed by their own responsibilities. They did their best, but they weren't able to fill the void Eli carried with him. Drawing became his sanctuary. It was his escape. When the world became too loud, too painful, he could retreat into his art, where he didn't have to speak, and where his grief could be expressed in strokes of graphite and color. I also learned that Eli had once applied to a prestigious art program, hoping for a chance to develop his skills, but the response was crushing. They told him he wasn't exceptional enough. Those words must have felt like a door slamming shut on his dreams, a dream he never dared to voice aloud. As I learned more about Eli's past, and the way he channeled his grief into art, something inside me shifted. I couldn't stand the idea that this boy, with so much untapped potential, would fade into the background, unnoticed and unappreciated. His talent deserved more than just an art assignment he completed in silence. It deserved to be seen, to be recognized. But how could I give him a chance without directly putting him in the spotlight? That was the dilemma. After all, Eli had never shown any desire for fame or recognition. His art was his personal outlet, his way of coping with a world that often felt too heavy. But what if there was a way to show him that he was more than what people saw on the surface? I made a decision, one that felt risky but necessary. I took a chance. I secretly entered Eli's best pieces into the National Young Artists Competition, a prestigious contest that recognized emerging talent across the country. I knew he'd never apply himself. He wasn't the type to take that step. So I forged the application using school credentials, filled out every form, and uploaded his artwork without a word to him. The thought of his reaction if he ever found out sent a knot into my stomach. I didn't want to raise his hopes, not without knowing if he had a chance, and so I kept my secret. I didn't tell Eli what I had done. I couldn't risk it. If it didn't work out, I didn't want him to be disappointed. Meanwhile, Mr. Carson continued to put Eli down, particularly in front of the class. He would mock Eli's work as childish or amateurish, even when it was clear to me that Eli's pieces had depth that most students could never even imagine. "You won't get anywhere with this, Eli," he would say, making sure to add his signature sneer. It broke my heart to hear it, but I knew that this competition, this one chance, might be Eli's moment to prove everyone wrong. It was during the parent-teacher night that the final straw broke. The school's gymnasium was crowded with parents, teachers and students, all exchanging pleasantries and updates about the school year. Eli's foster parents were there, trying their best to make small talk with Mr. Carson, who was, as always, quick to speak his mind. I had been standing nearby, talking with another teacher, when I overheard Mr. Carson's voice rise above the chatter. "Eli is a good kid, but he doesn't apply himself," he was saying, his tone dripping with condescension. "His grades are low, and honestly his efforts in class are mediocre at best. I've tried to push him, but—" He let the sentence trail off with a dismissive shrug. I watched as Eli stood silently near the entrance, his eyes downcast, his body tense. His foster parents were nodding, trying to listen attentively, but it was clear that the words were stinging. "Mr. Carson," I couldn't help but interject, stepping forward. My voice was steady but firm. "I don't think you understand. Talent doesn't always shout for attention. Some kids need a little more time, a little more encouragement, and just because someone is quiet doesn't mean they're not capable of greatness." The gym went quiet for a moment, and Mr. Carson's face flushed red. He opened his mouth to retort, but I continued, "Eli's got more to offer than you realize." Eli, however, didn't stay to hear the aftermath. I saw him slip out of the gym, unnoticed by most. He didn't say a word. He just walked out, his shoulders heavy with a weight. I couldn't help but feel for him. Weeks passed in a blur, and I tried to focus on my work, keeping an eye on Eli as best I could. I didn't want to give away the secret of his competition entry, at least not yet. The thought of his reaction kept me on edge. I wondered if I had made a mistake, if I was setting him up for disappointment, but I knew I had to wait and see what happened. Then one crisp morning, a large official-looking envelope arrived at the school, the kind of envelope that felt important just by its size, and the embossed seal on the front. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized the logo of the National Art Committee. The letter was addressed to Eli, and I could hardly believe it as I held it in my hands. I rushed to the office, heart pounding. The secretary handed it over to me, and without wasting another second, I made my way to Eli's classroom. I found him sitting in his usual spot at the back, his head bent low over his notebook. "Eli," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "I need to show you something." He looked up, puzzled as I handed him the envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it, and for a moment there was silence. Then his eyes widened, disbelief crossing his face, as he read the words aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "First place, nationally." He was stunned, too overwhelmed to process the news. And then slowly, he looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, a tearful smile spread across his face. A smile that was all his. It was the kind of smile that broke through years of silence, the kind that spoke volumes without a single word. The day of the assembly arrived, and the entire school gathered in the gymnasium, buzzing with excitement. Eli's artwork was to be showcased in front of everyone, an event that I had hoped would change the way people saw him. I watched from the back of the room, as the students and teachers filed, their chatter quieting as they took their seats. The large projector screen at the front of the room flickered to life, and Eli's drawing appeared on the screen. A soaring bird, its wings stretched wide, framed by a turbulent sky. The audience fell silent. For a moment, it was as if everyone collectively held their breath, drawn in by the sheer power of the piece. The detail, the emotion, it was hard to believe this had come from the quiet boy, who had so often been dismissed. It was impossible to ignore his talent now. Mr. Carson sat near the front, his face flushed. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and I could see the corners of his mouth twitch. I'm sure he hadn't expected this. No one had. He had spent so long labeling Eli as lazy and unmotivated, and now here was Eli, standing in front of everyone, proving him completely wrong. When it was time for Eli to speak, he stood up, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted the microphone. The room fell quiet, waiting for him to speak. Eli's voice was soft, but it carried, "I just want to thank the one teacher who believed in me when no one else did," he said, looking directly at me. "You gave me a chance when everyone else said I didn't matter." His voice cracked slightly, and he paused for a moment, as if trying to keep his emotions in check. Tears welled up in my eyes as I watched him. This boy who had been so silent for so long, finally find his voice. The assembly had barely ended when Mr. Carson approached Eli, his steps hesitant, and his expression uncomfortable. He had been one of the loudest critics of Eli's talent, dismissing him time and time again. But now, standing in front of the very student he had once belittled, his words faltered. "I just wanted to apologize, Mr. Carson said, shifting uncomfortably. I didn't know. I didn't see your potential, Eli. You've proven me wrong." Eli, his eyes still holding a quiet strength, simply nodded. He didn't say anything in return. No sharp words or biting remarks. He just nodded, accepting the apology in his own quiet way. It was as if the past no longer mattered to him. He had already moved on. Over the next few weeks, the world began to take notice of Eli. He received scholarship offers from prestigious art schools, each one more promising than the last. Mentorship opportunities flooded in, with renowned artists reaching out to help guide him. And to Eli's surprise, he was even featured in a national magazine. His artwork showcased alongside interviews that spoke of his journey, the quiet boy who had finally been heard. As I watched these events unfold, I couldn't help but reflect on how many students, like Eli, had been overlooked simply because they didn't fit the mold. They weren't loud, they didn't demand attention, and so they were dismissed. I had almost let Eli slip through the cracks too, almost ignored the power in his quietness. But I wouldn't make that mistake again. I quietly promised myself, watching Eli embrace his newfound future, that I would never overlook another quiet kid. And so Eli's story reminds us all that talent isn't always loud, and sometimes the quietest voices have the most to say. It took just one person to see his potential, to believe in him when no one else did, and now he's on a path to greatness. This story isn't just about art, it's about the power of seeing others for who they truly are beyond the surface. If you believe in someone, take that chance to lift them up. Don't let them fade into the background. If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, remember it only takes one person to change everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment below about the quiet voices in your life who deserve to be heard.